Wide is not a single decision. It's an overarching set of decisions, choices. It's something that is infused into the very core of an author's journey. To me, wide is a purposeful set of decisions, actions, mindsets, and behaviors that an author makes and takes in writing and publishing. It's an approach that considers the long term, considers all options, and considers numerous approaches to cultivating an author career. It is a philosophy, an approach, a way of life for a writer.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 182 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. And yes, this is the third solo episode in a row. And my apologies for that. I have plenty of fantastic guests that I've interviewed and have queued up, but I have not had the time to do the editing properly of those interviews for you. So I'm going solo again one last time as I'm in the throes of Wide for the Wind coming out on March 23rd, which is just in a few days. Still lots of tweaks. You know, people keep changing things. I keep having to update them. But that's coming up later in this episode. First, let's hear a word from this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. Findaway Voices is a platform for audiobook creation and distribution. If you're looking for a professional narrator to work with, you can look to Findaway Voices, who will help you find the best narrator from a variety of price ranges, voice talents from thousands of voice talents around the world. Or if you already have the audiobook ready to go, you can leverage Findaway Voices for distribution to 40 plus retail and library platforms where you mostly control the price. That's true. You set the price so you can do price promotions. You can take advantage of price promotions through their partnership with Chirp. And you can also do price promotions via Apple Audio. Now, speaking of Findaway Voices, I recently just got the audio back from Scott Overton, who has been the voice of Michael Andrews, my Canadian werewolf in that Canadian Werewolf series. And he just turned in the audio files for Fear and Longing in Los Angeles. But because I am in the throes of getting the next book out, the Wide for the Wind, I'm probably going to not be doing a lot of work on that until probably next week, where I actually have to then do my author notes, because I do those in my voice. And also I'm going to be inserting some special audio from the scenes where Alicia Witt is singing. So there's a little bit of tweaking to be done there, but Scott has done a remarkable job. I've only heard some of the clips from it so far, but I'm so thrilled. And I love that because I can work with Scott directly because we're friends and I know him well. He's a retired radio host. I remember the first time I met him is when he came into a Chapters in Sudbury, Ontario with a recorder. And this was my book launch, my very first book, self-published book in 2004 that I managed to do because it was made fully returnable through Ingram. Chapters was able to order as many copies as they wanted. So that was kind of a cool thing, and they weren't going to get stuck with them. But this was back in the early days. Scott interviewed me. I learned he was a writer. We became friends. He's a phenomenal writer, great science fiction writer. I've even had the thrill and luxury of publishing a couple of his stories in anthologies. We even did a collaborative book with Sean Costello, Scott Overton, and myself as three Sudbury writers, and we called it Strange Sudbury Stories, and that came out in the fall of 2020. But Scott has long been the voice of Michael Andrews, and he's provided me the files, and I'm uploading them to Findaway Voices and using them for all distribution. And so the audiobook for my latest novel is going to be available. That's just a long way of explaining one of the ways that I use Findaway Voices. If you want to see how you can leverage Findaway Voices for uploading your own audio or finding a professional narrator or some of the many price promotions you can run with Findaway Voices, you can check them out over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. As I mentioned, this is a solo episode. I'm going to be reading a preview of part of the opening of the introduction for Wide for the Win, which is basically, well, what is Wide anyway? And so I wanted to share that with you, just as sort of a sneak peek. The book Wide for the Win is coming out soon. There will be an audiobook, which I will be reading eventually, all in good time. But it has been a crazy, crazy busy week. Among the big things that happened is I had an operation. I had a hernia surgery on Tuesday, and that was on Tuesday. I'm looking at the calendar. I guess that was Tuesday, March 16th. So just a little personal aside that is kind of interesting is my dad, 17 years ago, went in for surgery on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, and it was for removal of a kidney. There was a cancerous growth, and he went in and was supposed to have the removal of the kidney, and me and my cousin drove up to be there for the operation, and he died in the recovery room. What had happened is the clip on his renal artery, the clips came off. And he was just as he was recovering in the recovery room, just as he was doing his typical dad jokes and making the nurses laugh as he does. I think I kind of got a little bit of that from him. And then he just dropped and he died. He just bled to death instantly. And so I was a little nervous going into this operation. I was having a minor incision. He was having he was having a kidney removed. So it was a significant surgery. Mine was like maybe a 2 centimeter slice in my umbilical area to tuck the hernia back inside, put a mesh in there. But I was still nervous about it because of the timelines. Now I know my dad had a really, really bad feeling. The morning of, he woke up, he told my mom, he said, Jeannie, I don't feel good about this. And my dad was not superstitious. My dad was never fearful of anything. Like, he was one of the bravest people I know. And I didn't know this, that he had said that to my mom. And she's like, oh, Gene, it's just a simple operation. You'll be fine. You'll come home. Next day, it'll be fine. Everything will be good. And so he started off the day just not feeling good, went in anyways. And then when we got there, I think the surgery was delayed like 3 or 4 hours because we were there waiting with him. And again, the whole time he's joking around, doing all the stuff. When he walked into to go into the surgery, to the other side where we couldn't see him, I remember kissing him and telling him I loved him, and he was joking with the nurses as he was going through those swinging doors, and that was the last time I saw him alive. So, yeah, I was a little bit nervous. I did a letter for Liz, one for my son Alexander, just sort of a final letter, just in case. And then I provided a whole bunch of logins. Okay, here's my login for all of the different places where I'm publishing my works. Here's my login for my bank. Here's how these things work. Here are the people I trust in the book industry implicitly that will help you with my IP if you need help. Many of them. You've met several of them, but these are the people I trust and will help you out. And sorry that I left such a bloody mess in the den because it is still a mess. But anyways, I did talk, when I talked to the anesthesiologist, I didn't have any bad feelings or premonitions, but I just thought, on the safe side. When I had a hernia surgery in my 20s, I was able to not go under general anesthesia. It was local. They kept me awake. I was joking, chatting with them while they were doing the procedure, and the anesthesiologist and the surgeon agreed. Yeah, that's fine. We can keep you awake. You're not squeamish, I hope. And I was like, well, it's not like I could see. They always have like this drape up so you can't see what's going on. And they kept me awake. I actually had a good time. It was a grand time. It felt like a party. I was just relaxed. I was chatting. They're kind of doing the operation. I hope I wasn't distracting them too much, making Monty Python jokes. But it went so well. I was out of there 2.5 hours earlier than expected because I didn't have to wake up from the grogginess and all that stuff. So I was actually home and working a couple hours after the surgery, and apart from some pain, I feel okay. And now I'm reminded of the importance, because I was so nervous, of the importance of updating my will and doing a proper last letter where all the things, Liz can find all the things about my publishing and my IP, because you can make money for 75 years beyond your death, or your family can earn this money that's coming in automatically every month from, well, if you're doing it wide properly, from maybe dozens and dozens of sources, which we're going to get to. But that's a bit of a personal update. So that was going on. I also did a launch. Obviously, I launched Fear and Longing in Los Angeles a few weeks ago. I've been doing a lot of publicity thanks to my publicist, Mickey from Creative Edge. And I'll probably share the details as I'm kind of wrapping down this. I made Canadian Werewolf in New York 99 cents. I had an international book pub on March 12th, and a whole bunch of promotions that I ran, as well as some ads via BookBub and KDP, Amazon advertising. And so those were going on. And I'll share that in a future episode. But what I want to do right now is I just want to cut to these excerpts from Wide for the Win to share with you. So there will not be a reflection, because the whole episode is a reflection. But that way you've got some content, because I have not missed a single week since I started this podcast. And I'm not going to start missing now, even though I'm cramped under deadlines. But I will be back next week. And oh, come on, please, Mark, please get your act together and get one of these beautiful interviews out for these lovely, lovely listeners. That's you. Thank you, lovely listeners, for listening to this podcast. But that's enough rambling and babbling. Let's get on to the main content. Well, what the heck is Wide anyway? Introduction. Prefatory disclaimers, a note on biases, and how to use this book. What is Wide? Let's talk wide. Yeah, I know, that's why you're here. But I'm talking specifically of my use of the term wide in all caps. Wide! Like that. I've done it on purpose multiple times, in fact, throughout this book. I did it very specifically. And trust me, it provided fruit for animated discussion with my editors and early readers. It even started off in an earlier draft of the book with my use of the term wide with a capital letter, as if it were a proper noun. But wide, all caps, is much more than just a proper noun, at least in my book. Get it? My book? Ha, that's a pun. No, this isn't in the actual book. I'm just saying it now. 'Cause, hey, it's my podcast. But yeah, wide is much more than just a proper noun, at least in my book. It's perhaps a proper verb, because wide is an action, isn't it? A philosophy, a way of publishing. Yeah, I know, a proper verb is when you convert a noun into an action. It's considered conversion or verbification. When, for example, someone says they want to Xerox something when referring to making photocopies, or to hoover a carpet with a vacuum cleaner. Despite trying, and trust me, I did try, I wasn't really able to construct any meaningful sentences applying the word wide as a verb. They all came out more like adverbs. Perhaps you'll have better luck. At least Aaron Wright was successful in defining a person who adapts a publishing-wide ethic into their author business as a wideling. But let's get back to the word itself, in its existing and known forms. As an adjective, the word means having a larger or greater distance from side to side than expected, or a more than average width, such as a wide road or a wide hallway. It can also mean the inclusion of a great variety of things, such as a wide range of options. As an adverb, the word can denote the full extent of something, as in the phrase, "her eyes opened wide." It can also refer to something far from a particular point or mark. The shot went wide, completely missing the goal. Other definitions of the word involve having a great extent or extending over a vast area. You get the point. Plenty of those things are in play when we consider wide, or even wide with a capital W, or in the case of the context of this book, wide, all caps. I want to call attention to the word as something big, something larger, something that is its own thing and not just the opposite of being exclusive to Amazon Kindle. Thus, I purposefully use the term wide repeatedly throughout this book. No, seriously, get to the bloody point. What is wide? In the general sense of the word for most authors, the term wide refers to publishing an ebook beyond Amazon Kindle. But as you'll see demonstrated throughout this book, that's a rather narrow view of the word, because it merely refers to a single decision, a simple and rudimentary either-or that's pretty limited in scope. It takes a viewpoint that there's Amazon, and then there's the rest. That entire rest is much larger, much more significant, much wider than that overly simplistic viewpoint lets on. Because wide is not a simple decision. It's an overarching set of decisions and choices. It's something that is infused into the very core of an author's journey. To me, wide is a purposeful set of decisions, actions, mindsets, and behaviors that an author makes and takes in writing and publishing. It is an approach that considers the long term, considers all options, and considers numerous approaches to cultivating an author career. Cultivating? Why did I say it like cultivating? I'm leaving that in. It is a philosophy, an approach, a way of life for a writer. And, as you'll see shortly, it's far greater than just looking at it being Amazon versus everyone else. Because if you only see it as that, you, my friend, are limiting your options. You are, in other words, only seeing a narrow choice rather than a much wider set of options, or perhaps a much wider set of options. Disclaimers. This entire book is tainted with my own biases, perspectives, and viewpoints. That should be obvious, but I wanted to call attention to it. We'll get to that shortly. Although the term wide is often used by indie authors, and thus I suspect that most readers are likely approaching from that perspective, I tried to approach this book in a way that almost any writer, regardless of where they are on their author journey, can learn from it. To that end, I purposely tried to make it useful for indie authors and traditionally published authors alike, as you'll likely see in later chapters. I'll often use the terms self-publishing and indie publishing interchangeably. Within the self-publishing sphere, many authors take offense to the former term and have adapted indie publishing as a more accurate description of what they're engaging in. And it's true, because in successful self-publishing, the only self is perhaps self-directed. Successful self-published authors might be in control of where and how they publish. That's the self part. But they hire and work with others collaboratively. Folks like editors, cover designers, marketing professionals, etc. So, if you're engaged in the more self-directed type of publishing, please don't take offense. I'm using the term self-publishing as a way for authors who are new to this space to understand the difference between authors who control their own publishing and traditionally published authors who sell or license their work to another publisher. While we're on that topic, I should remind you that a real publisher, a proper publisher, never charges you for your work. So, if you are paying a third party to publish your work, or for a package that includes things like cover design, formatting, editing, and distribution, you're using a vanity publisher. Their imprint might be on the spine of the book, but they are not the publisher. At least, they're not a real publisher. A real publisher is one where the money flows only one way, from the publisher to the author. I also want to be very clear that this book isn't meant to be a prescriptive step-by-step for how you can find success in publishing wide. It's meant to help you open your eyes, your mind, and your heart to things that I think will be useful in assisting you on your own path. This is something that'll be repeated throughout the book. Your path, your journey, your preferences, your biases are very important considerations. I'm going to share and say things that you don't agree with. I'm going to advise things that you might have tried and that haven't worked for you. That's okay. There is no one path. There is no one journey. Even within your own unique and specific writer journey, there will be variances. Something you try for one book or series will work effectively on one retail platform, but flops miserably on another. It will always be that way. Similarly, you won't put this book down and suddenly be equipped with all the knowledge to dominate and crush it with all the retail, subscription, and library platforms. I hope that you will walk away empowered with some insights, perspectives, and understandings to help you cultivate and curate your own unique and individualized approach to being a successful wide author. I'm not a six-figure plus author, nor do I pretend to be, or even play one on TV. I'm not going to share a, "this is what I did and therefore you can do it too," bullshit approach. You're too smart to believe that just mimicking what another successful author does is a pathway to success. But if you do believe that all you have to do is follow some magic step-by-step plan, or you believe that because I'm not an uber-rich self-publishing success story, you have nothing to learn from me, please stop reading and just put this book down. I will not be able to help you. I'd even argue that nobody is going to be able to help you. Because, as my good friend James A. Owen says in his book, Drawing Out the Dragons, if you really want to do something, no one can stop you. But if you really don't want to do something, no one can help you, including me. A note on biases. All authors bring their own biases to a book they write, just like all readers in turn bring their own bias. These biases are based on personal experience, upbringing, and the circles one engages in. I wanted to briefly share a few biases of mine here so you could apply the proverbial grain of salt to my advice, suggestions, and perspective. I'm sure that many of them will become apparent, but why not start off ensuring you know where I'm coming from? Traditional publishing is not a dirty word to me. I started writing in my early teens and started submitting my writing to different markets for short stories when I was 15 years old. This was in the pre-computer days of typewriters and large manila envelopes and self-addressed stamped envelopes. Self-publishing existed, but not in the way it does today. My books have been both self-published and traditionally published, and I continue to be open to both, depending on the specific book or project. My bias is that you should also be open. Because, as we'll see, that's part of my larger definition of what it means to be truly wide. In addition, while we're on the topic, I'm likely to occasionally use the term publisher and author interchangeably. For example, if I talk about how a retailer interacts with publishers, I'm using the term inclusive to denote traditional publishers, indie authors who are self-publishing direct, and third-party distributors who provide indie author titles to the retailer. I spent 6 years working for Rakuten Kobo Inc. in Toronto, Ontario. I was hired to come up with a solution for self-published authors. While there, I worked with an amazing team that developed and launched the platform Kobo Writing Life. By the time I left Kobo in late 2017, Kobo Writing Life accounted for 1 in every 4 English language sales in Kobo. Since it was regularly the number 1 selling source of books in English language territories on Kobo, I suppose you can call that a success. My preferred and default reading device or platform for ebooks is Kobo. I'm sharing this so that you're aware of my pretty blatant bias towards having a soft spot for this company and platform. Draft to Digital, D2D, is a distribution platform operating out of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma in the United States. Since October 2018, I've been working part-time for D2D as Director of Business Development. Prior to that, even when I was working at Kobo and running their self-publishing platform, I was using D2D for distribution to Apple and Nook and other platforms. And even back then, I was using their free Microsoft Word to EPUB conversion tool because it was quite a bit better than the built-in one that Kobo Writing Life uses. So, while I've attempted to be transparent and open to all perspectives in relation to distribution options, you should be aware of where those biases exist. Another area where I'll probably display a strong bias is my discussion of independent bookstores. I have managed indie bookstore operations, have plenty of friends who own and run their own bookstores, and spent a few years on the board of directors as president of the Canadian Booksellers Association. When vice president and president of the Booksellers Association in Canada, I went on national radio and television in several full-on assaults against Amazon, their cutthroat business practices, the bottomless pockets of funding they had to send an endless barrage of lobbyists and high-paid corporate lawyers to Parliament Hill in Ottawa. All tactics that were putting independent bookstores at risk of closure. So yeah, I'm going to likely come across as someone with a hearty and strong bias toward independent bookshops. Canadian content is something I'll likely not be able to avoid. I was born in Canada. I live in Canada. I think Canada is the greatest nation in the world. You're likely to see all kinds of references to my perspective as a Canadian. You're likely to catch references to hockey and poutine and Rush and the Tragically Hip, to prime ministers instead of presidents, and to provinces and territories instead of states, and to Commonwealth concerns, and to an admiration for the British monarchy. I can't help it. I was born this way. Speaking of which, did you know that Lady Gaga, aka Stephanie Joan Angelina Germanotta, has French-Canadian roots? See? There I go, finding Canada in things. In an oh-so-Canadian way, I'll apologize for those things right now. I might even apologize along the way too, because, Canadian. One last thing about bias. Given my past, and even my present, struggling against the monopolistic Amazon overlords, you might think that I hate Amazon, or I have an anti-Amazon approach. I want to assure you that I'm not anti-Amazon, but I am anti-exclusivity. Like many authors out there, I'm able to make a decent income from the tools that Amazon makes available. I want authors to be successful on Amazon, but I want them to be successful on all platforms, or at least on many platforms, if not all of them. So, where at times it might seem like I'm being anti-Amazon, just remember, I'm not anti-Amazon. I'm pro-wide. An admission of exclusivity. It's obvious that I'm partial to a wide approach in publishing, but I'm not going to pretend that I've never taken part in Kindle's exclusivity program. In fact, I've been participating in KDP Select since it launched. And yes, I've had books exclusive to Kindle and even launched books into exclusivity on Amazon. In fact, I have always had at least one book in KDP Select, and have since the beginning of the program when they first launched it. I was sitting in the Kobo office in Toronto as the head of the Kobo Writing Life team when Amazon announced their exclusivity program. And within hours of that announcement, I collected some content I'd been considering publishing and put it into the program. Why did I do that? Well, one, I did it so I could test and explore the program. And two, as someone who helps advise and support authors on their journeys, I needed to understand the program from the inside rather than the outside. So, yes, though I'm an advocate for wide publishing, I'll likely always have at least one title in the KDP Select program, even if it's something I never push or try to leverage, just to keep me in the loop. Consider it a sacrifice I make for the common good of understanding and knowledge. I have, as I mentioned, launched books into KDP Select and leveraged the various tools available, free or Kindle Countdown deals, and experimented with them. I've never made serious coin from the experience, but again, all I wanted was to learn and explore. So I'm hoping you don't see me as a hypocrite, but rather someone who tasted a specific food and then said, nope, not for me. My numbers on wide. I want you to be aware of where I sit on the wide spectrum so that you can ensure that I'm speaking from direct experience. Unfortunately, because my annual numbers aren't just dependent upon online dashboard sales, but rather a combination of self-publishing, traditional publishing, and what I call mixed sources, I often don't have the full previous year's sales numbers until several months into the year. And because I'm writing this in early 2021, I don't yet have the full and solid 2020 sales numbers from all of my sources. So instead, I'll share my numbers going back a few years. And no, I'm not going to share actual numbers, but rather percentages. As an author, I'm likely sitting somewhere in the gigantic mid-list of author earnings. I make a modest mid-five-figure income from my writing. Enough to make a respectable living, but definitely not enough to break any banks. I know that there are tens of thousands of authors sitting in that same range as me. Authors who are earning far more than they would be had they just chosen either traditional publishing or self-publishing. Authors who are earning a respectable amount of money and writing books that a specific core group of readers enjoy. What's important to share here is that my numbers, while modest, come from diverse sources. If any single one of them dries up, sure, it'll hurt, but it won't entirely ruin me. I'll have plenty of other legs to stand on. And that's one of the reasons why I'm such an advocate for wide publishing. So here's my breakdown of my 2019 writing income. Amazon, 17.89%. Traditional publishing, 12.07%. Kobo, 6.01%. Audio, 2.39%. Apple, 1.01%. Barnes & Noble, 0.24%. Google, 0.04%. Smashwords, 0.01%. Other self-pub, 28.53%. Mixed, traditional, and self-pub, 30.8%. Despite the percentages being larger, I put the final two categories of other self-pub and mixed trad and self-pub on the bottom because they each represent numerous platforms, sources, and streams, which would take too long to break down. Pages, in fact. The important thing to remember is that on their own, most of these mini sources don't really add up to much, but when you combine them, they really do add up over time to a significant chunk. If I lost Amazon, sure, I'd lose a hefty chunk of my writing income, perhaps as much as 20% of that income, but I still have plenty of other sources to depend on, and I'm cool with that. Also, if I only look at my self-publishing ebook revenue for 2019, Amazon Kindle makes up approximately 44% of my income. That's a much larger chunk of money. And, according to a quick snapshot of my sales via Scribe count in 2021, Amazon is currently representative of 55% of my ebook sales, with the other major platforms accounting for 45% combined. So, when it comes to ebooks, I have a much larger dependency on Amazon and Kindle. That's yet another reason, in my perspective, that diversifying one's income as a writer as wide as possible is an important exercise. How to use this book. As mentioned above, this book isn't meant to be a step-by-step guide for being successful wide. But it is meant to be a companion to help you define your own specific and custom path on your route to publishing success. This book is divided into 5 sections: mindset, retail, libraries, direct and other, closing thoughts. You'll likely notice that a significant amount of space is dedicated to mindset, with fewer pages digging into the specific tactics that can be employed. Yes, when I talk through different retail and library websites, I share a few very specific details that I feel would be useful for authors to understand. But trying to keep up with the changes on each of those platforms as they evolve is one of the challenges of creating a book like this. I know it's an issue Erin Wright dealt with when she was working on her version of the book. The reality is, it's almost impossible to keep up with and stay abreast of changes at a retailer or distributor within the pages of a book. But what is important is for you to understand the fundamentals of the wide author mindset. And that's why you'll find the majority of effort in this book is invested in that area. I also have confidence, as demonstrated by the amazing community of people who regularly engage and share their stories, their tips, their experiences, that you, like me, will likely find incredible ongoing value in the Facebook group, Wide for the Win. Well, that's it for episode 182. I hope you enjoyed this additional sneak peek of the book, Wide for the Win, including some of the goof-ups and things I snuck in there. I guess it's good practice for when I'm actually reading the proper official audiobook. Thank you so much for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. If you would like to help the podcast out, you can please leave a review for it on the podcatcher of your choice, or better yet, tell somebody that you think would find value in these Stark Reflections. And also to you, my patrons, those of you who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. Thank you guys so much for your belief in me and for continuing to support the podcast. I am behind a couple of my reflections on other podcasts. I have them queued up, or at least noted on the whiteboard sitting in front of me, to slip a couple of those in before the end of March to give you those extra bonus reflections that you're looking for, hopefully looking for. Maybe you're just being really generous and awesome and wanting to support me. But I hope if you are a patron that you are getting value in that additional content. So again, thank you all for listening to the podcast. So until next week and next episode, which I hope is an interview again, I should be back on track. This is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.